Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to go through 7 of what I consider to be essential woodworking tools if you're getting started or just setting up your shop for the first time. These are the ones I would go back out and buy immediately to start up my shop if I was starting over. So if that sounds interesting, stick around. Alright, so we're going to kick it off with the most obvious one, the table saw. Some people might say that's not essential for a woodworking shop or a startup shop in general, but there's no denying that you cannot beat the repeatability and the accuracy of a table saw over measuring and marking and cutting with freehand circular saws. This particular saw happens to be a Metabo. It's a 10-inch saw here. This one I bought probably 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and I bought this specific one because it was the only job site saw that would accommodate a dado stack. This particular saw happens to be around $500 brand new, but you can get something comparable today for around $300, $350. It may not be the biggest saw or the most capable saw, but for a start out woodworking shop, this can handle just about anything you can throw at it. And with the added benefit of throwing in a table saw sled, you can turn this into a much more functional piece of equipment and potentially even skip some of the other tools on this list. All right, next on the list, another obvious one is the miter saw. Now, some people would prefer to just push a circular saw only for a beginner shop, but this offers much more flexibility. This particular saw happens to be a 12-inch sliding miter saw. This allows you to get a deeper cut and a wider cut on your wood. So if you like getting deep, this is the saw for you. Now, I'm going to go on a limb here, and this may upset some people. I don't think you should cheap out on a miter saw. From my experience, the lower end miter saws are not reliable. I had an Evolution miter saw. I had a Craftsman miter saw. That one happened to be a little bit older. And I think I had one other one in the middle of that. And all of them had accuracy issues, quite a few accuracy issues, and most notably capacity issues. If you have any interest in doing this for more than a year, let's say, go ahead and spend the money on something better. This is not a top of the line saw. This is not a $1,500 Festool saw or anything like that. This one is around $350, but in my opinion, it is well worth the extra 100 or 150 over some of the more budget saws. Next on the list is a drill, or a drill and a driver. You don't want to get just a driver. The drill is necessary for drilling holes. Obviously, it's in the name, right? This set happens to be a skill set. I got this at my local Menards. I had a Black & Decker set before that. The impact gave out on it though, so I went ahead and switched models just because I'd heard good things about this particular impact, and it does actually have a lot more power than that Black & Decker did. As you're getting into woodworking, you're likely going to start somewhere with pocket holes or dowel joints. Pocket holes are very popular. I still use pocket holes because in a lot of scenarios, they're plenty strong and a preferred method, like for cabinet building and things of that nature. The drill itself, you're going to use that for countersinking, drilling hole, pre-drilling holes so wood doesn't split out. The driver, obviously, you're going to drive the screws with that. You can go with 2 drills instead, or just a single drill. You will find pretty quickly, as I did, that just a single tool usually is not enough because you're going to end up swapping your bits quite often between your drilling and your driving bits. So do go ahead and get both of these if you can, but if you can only get one, go with the drill. Now that I've demonstrated how to drill your mom, let's move on. Next on the list, we have a sander. Now, you can get several different types of sanders. There's several different kinds of palm sanders. There's orbital sanders. There's random orbital sanders. There's finger sanders. You know what that is. And they all kind of serve a purpose. But for general woodworking, I would recommend a random orbital. One thing you'll run into if you get a standard orbital is when you go to stain something, you'll see a bunch of swirl marks in your board. To build onto that, the type of orbital sander you buy or brand does matter. They are not all equal. If you go very bottom of the barrel with your random orbital sander, like I did my first time around, again, that was a Black & Decker cordless, you will still end up with swirl marks when you go to stain or finish your pieces. And it's just because the random action on the sander is not good. So I ended up rebuying, and again, this one is a skill. I don't have a bias towards skill. It's just what the next step up is at my local hardware store, which happens to be Menards in my area. It has been a game changer for me. Now it's still got its flaws, and there's still a lot of room for improvement, but this I can at least get a piece that does not have all those swirl marks when you're done. The type of sandpaper you use will also matter. You don't have to get super expensive sandpaper, but you also don't want to cheap out. Some of the very low end sandpaper will have very inconsistent grits, and you will end up with gouges in your wood that you can't get back out without taking it back down to like a 60 or 80 grit and starting over. That said, with sandpaper, you do get what you pay for. If you jump up and pay the extra money and get like the Cubitron sandpaper, you will get a much better finish. I myself have not tried that, but from the research I've done, that seems to be the direction people are going. I hope everybody understands what I'm saying. Now it's time to get jiggy with it. This is a jigsaw. This is going to be the only tool in your shop starting out, unless you go and buy a bandsaw that you can cut curves with. Now, I will preface this with this is a lot less accurate than a curve you can get on a bandsaw. You're going to pay significantly more money for a bandsaw. And I think honestly, starting out, this is perfectly fine for most jobs. I used this exclusively, I think, for the first 3 or 4 years that I was getting into woodworking. I've only recently, in the last year and a half, got a small bandsaw, and I don't regret it, but I still turn to this for a lot of things because it is still more convenient and it's portable. So there is a lot of benefits to a jigsaw itself. This particular one is skill. The only reason this itself is a skill tool is because I had already bought the combo set with the drill and the driver, and I wanted a battery platform that fit all of my tools instead of random tools having random batteries. Earlier in the video, we talked about the miter saw and completely glossed over the circular saw. And while I don't believe this is a suitable primary tool in the shop, it is still, in my opinion, a very necessary tool in a beginner shop at the very least, and sometimes in intermediate and advanced woodworking shops. Now, that all is with a caveat that if you can afford some of the more expensive tools, you will get a better value and you will get more use out of those higher quality tools. But there is a place for the circular saw. My main use for the circular saw is breaking down sheet goods. You can bring a full sheet of plywood to your table saw, but depending on the orientation or the size of the cut you need to make, your saw either cannot accommodate the size of cut you need to make, or it is just an unsafe cut to make because you have more material hanging outside of the blade than is inside of the blade. And when you do that, especially on a cross cut, let's say on a full sheet of plywood, you're actually creating an opportunity to bind the plywood and create a kickback situation, or you could potentially stop your blade and burn up the motor in your saw. So I use this mainly to break down sheet goods, and I use that with the help from Craig. Where's Craig? Have you seen Craig? Here's Craig. This is the Craig AccuCut, and this is the budget way to get a track saw. Now, this is not a track saw in the typical sense where you would have a plunge saw that can plunge into your board. It uses just a sled that attaches to any circular saw, and then you can run it against this aluminum track to make your cut on your plywood. This is just over 4 feet long. They do have some extensions. So this is mainly used for rip cuts, cutting across the 4-foot section of a piece of plywood. This one is the Craig Rip Cut. This one can be used to break down your sheet goods on the 8-foot side. This can go up to 24 inches on either side. So no matter how wide you need your piece of plywood to be, if it's over 24 inches, you can just cut from the other side and, let's say, cut a 12-inch strip, and that will leave you with approximately a 36-inch strip. The cost to get into an AccuCut, I believe, is around $80. The cost of a circular saw is, I believe, somewhere around $40 to $50. That said, the cost to get into a decent entry-level track saw, looking between $200 and $250, with them going up in price exponentially from there. All that said, I do believe the circular saw is still an essential tool in the wood shop, unless you can afford a track saw or have some other method to safely break down your sheet goods without getting into harm's way. On the journey to get your woodworking shop set up, the route will lead you to our final tool, the router. The router is the last tool on our list today, but it is not because it's the least important. The router serves many purposes, but one of the main things we use the router for is to take a boring, dull piece of wood and give it profiles, give it character, give it appeal so that it looks like something beautiful. You can take a plain 1x3 or 1x4 and with one or a few router bits turn that into a beautiful piece of trim work that looks like a master carpenter created it in their shop. Now there's a few different styles of routers you can get. You can get a palm router, you can get a fixed base router, you can get a plunge router. Those are the most common types of routers. Sometimes as you progress, you will work your way into like a router table, which just encompasses a motor inside of a router lift or a router carriage. They all serve one purpose, and that is to create profiles and grooves and boards. That said, the type of router does matter. This smaller router is good for doing edge profiles and doing small dados and things of that nature. If you're going to be doing through cuts or anything where you need to plunge directly into the material, you're likely going to want to move on to a larger plunge style router to accomplish that. There you have it, my top 7 essential woodworking tools, and the ones I would personally buy if I was going to start a woodworking shop all over again. Now, my list is very subjective. Everybody will have their own opinion on what is the best tools to start out with. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of videos on YouTube already that explain other people's point of view. This is just my experience and my perspective. So I appreciate everybody staying to the end. And if you liked what I did today, if you got any value out of it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you like. And if you don't mind, I'm going to go finish drilling your mom. Have a good one.